February 21st, 1945, D+2, at the base of Hill 382. The sand is ground coffee, soft as ash and hungry as mud. It swallows boots to the ankle and hisses when men shift their weight. Sulphur knots the back of the throat. First Lieutenant Jack Rourke of the 26th Marines presses into a wedge of lava, counting the dry clacks of a Type 99 somewhere in the stone, marking the rhythm like a metronome for fear. He lifts a handset wired to the tank battalion net, a frequency he learned only yesterday, and repeats the phrase that has crept into orders since the beach. Hold for flame. A shape moves through haze with the patience of a tugboat. Sergeant Ben Torch Delgado's M4A3. Sherman noses forward, its 75 missing, a blunt projector in its place like the snout of a furnace. Beneath the turret basket sit armoured tanks holding roughly 290 gallons of thickened gasoline. CO 2 cylinders nest against bulkheads like steel lungs, their needles near 300 psi. On a good day, the projector throws a 60 to 80-yard jet. On a rare day, the wind makes it longer. Inside, the crew moves like a four-handed clock, driver easing clutch and brake to hold the hull steady, gunner steering the jet with wrists where a sight used to be, loader cradling spare nozzles wrapped in rags, the TC half out of the cupola, tasting wind and counting seconds. The CO2 hiss sounds like a soda fountain in hell. In the dark behind the slit, Corporal Hiroshi Nakata of the 109th Division counts heartbeats between bursts and tells himself the cave is stronger than the shell. His tunnel has blast walls and bends, air vents cut into broken rock to drink wind and give smoke a place to go. Doctrine forbade banzai charges. The general promised that stone would outlast steel. Their water is measured in sips, their bullets in minutes, but here the island feels eternal. Rourke's scouts crawl and chalk a breathing hole with a sailor's half-moon. The tank creeps to its mark. The commander's voice comes through the handset like a man speaking from inside a bell. Mark confirmed. Zippo 1 on Delgado gives the nozzle 2 short squeezes to clear the throat, then a steady press that turns moving air into a conveyor of fire. The flame rides the tunnel's draft, bends around the blast wall, and disappears into the room that thought geometry would save it. The hill answers in a low sound felt more than heard. Heat arrives as a shove. Men tumble from apertures that stared like dead eyes all morning, some burning, most simply running from the theft of oxygen. Marines rise without cheer. Machine guns sow the exits. A dozer grinds up to bite the softened lip. Rourke lowers the handset and breathes through his teeth. The island has learned a new verb. To flame a cave is to change the math. Night in the tunnels is not night at all. It is a damp iron glow fed by lanterns and by heat that seeps from Iwo's bones. Corporal Hiroshi Nakata pads along a gallery shored with timbers scavenged from the Airfield project, chalk arrows guiding him to firing chambers named like rooms in a house. He runs a hand over a curved blast wall meant to bounce concussive force back toward the mouth. Down here, time is measured by condensation dripping from the ceiling onto ammunition crates. He believes, as every man down here believes, that the island's stone will outlast any barrage the Americans can sail to its shores. The briefing map before the landings showed a city under a city, more than 11 miles of interlinked tunnels, some 75 feet down, tying pillboxes, mortar pits and living galleries so that a position shattered at the surface would still have lungs and hands below. Vents disguised as broken rock drink the wind, murder holes spit it. Water is rationed by the dipper, ammunition by the minute. The garrison began the campaign with something like 60% of a single full allowance. Every load of cartridges, grenades and sandbags has to count twice. Doctrine says no banzai, fight from depth, trade space for time, make them pay in hours and blood. Up above, impatience has yielded to process. Marines learn to read stone like a manual. They smell sulphur, listen for air, and trace faint exhalations over the black sand. Portable flamethrower teams go forward and too often do not come back. Their tanks run dry in seconds, and they stand in the wrong universe of risk. Company commanders absorb the lesson and bend the plan. They will not trade a man for 10 feet when they can trade fuel for 10 yards. The word goes out along the beach and up the terraces, hold for flame. Nakata hears a rumour carried down by a runner whose lips are white with blisters. A tank without a gun, a snouted thing that throws fire around corners. He laughs because corners are why they dug, because a corner is a promise. He checks his men's bandoliers and passes back the canteen. The walls bead a little wetness. The air is alive. It moves even when the island is still. He presses his palm to the vent and feels the faint pull, the cave breathing, the island itself breathing. The messages from higher headquarters are spare and disciplined. Conserve water, rotate sentries, fire only on targets that expose flesh. Kuribayashi's orders are clear about the surface. Survive the shelling, deny the enemy a target, let them come to the mouths. In the galleries the air is hotter than outside. Men sleep on mats above warm stone and dream of rain. A continent away from the black sand, Detroit's winter breath steams at shift change. Lillian Kitzmiller signs a manifest that smells of oil and graphite and hands it to a crane operator who swings turret rings into the night like moons. Under mercury lamps, the Detroit Arsenal tank plant looks like organized thunder. Rows of M4 hulls wait, numbers chalked on glacis plates, the language of a nation that decided to become a foundry. Lillian can recite the parts list the way a violinist knows a score, because the score never stops. The numbers are their own flag. America has built roughly 49,000 M4 Shermans, enough that planners can set aside hulls for strange conversions and still feed Europe, the Pacific, and the schools. Interchangeability is not a slogan, it is a law. A traverse motor burned by grit becomes a problem measured in hours, not weeks. A nozzle scorched by backflash becomes a summons, not a stoppage. Lillian does not know Sergeant Delgado, but she stamps a spare assembly that will fit his tank by serial and faith. In Hawaii, Navy Seabees and the Chemical Warfare Service fit POA CWSH-1 kits with a ritual as exact as a catechism. Tanks for thickened gasoline ride under the turret basket, armoured and baffled. CO2 cylinders sit like lungs against the bulkhead. Cables run to a trigger where a gun's pistol grip used to be. Tests happen in an old quarry, the projector throwing a rope of fire that smacks rock and licks into cracks. Crews learn the rhythm of short licks to clear the throat, long pause to punish stone, and traverse sweeps that comb flame across apertures without wasting fuel. From Honolulu's docks to Iwo's surf zone, drums of napalm-thickened fuel shuffle like chess pieces. A rear infantry phone is bolted to each Sherman's tailplate so a lieutenant can put his mouth to steel and speak to the man inside. That is culture as much as hardware, a democracy's instinct to connect tools and people. If the island eats a dozer blade, there is another strapped to a deck. If a hose cracks, a replacement waits in a crate with Lillian's penciled check. Here is an impossible comparison whispered in yards and written on ledgers. A single American plant's monthly output of armoured hulls outweighs what some foes could birth in a year. The math feels unreal until you hear it roaring up a beach, until you watch 8 converted Shermans decide the pace of a corps, until a factory clerk in Michigan and a welder in Hawaii become the hands inside a tank that can make a hill exhale fire. Dawn makes a furnace of the haze around Hill 382, and the world narrows to a chalked arc around a hole that breathes. Rourke's point man lies on his side with his cheek buried in ash, counting seconds between the stutter of a machine gun and the quiet where he can move. Delgado eases the Sherman forward until the track lugs click against a stone rib and stops on the line they agreed in hand signals. The wind is gentlemanly, a faint brush from seaward. He feathers the trigger, 2 short spits to warm the throat, then steadies his breath. Inside the tank, it is choreography more than bravado. The gunner keeps his eye where a sight used to be and steers with wrists. The driver watches the CO2 gauge drift toward the notch where he will call range. The loader holds spare nozzles like a priest holds candles. A good burn, the instructors said, feels like a door you can push with your hand. The draft does the work, dragging flame around the blast wall into the room that thinks it is safe. It is not a torrent, it is not a tantrum. It is a measured answer to geometry. In the tunnel, Nakata tastes the heat before he feels it. The first instinct is to duck. The second is to go where there is air. Training says hold through shelling. Heat does not negotiate. He waves men back along a spur the engineers cut to draw coolness from higher ground, but the coolness betrays them. It becomes a road for fire. Someone screams in a room they thought indecipherable to maps. The sergeant shoves men toward a rear exit and pops the hatchstone with the heel of his hand. The hatch inhales. The air is a rope now, and the rope is on fire. Rourke's platoon does its work without cheer. They have learned that real victories arrive as the sound of men not dying. The dozer variant clanks up to bite the opening and rip a lane where flame has made rock obedient. Demolition men move with the care of watchmakers. A radio man logs the time of the burn and the gallons taken on the last resupply, because even terror finds its place on a line. Someone kicks a spent smoke can aside and mutters that the wind is a better marine than any of them today. Delgado eases off the trigger and listens to the metal cool. He has fuel left and a list of vents to visit. The tank smells of heated enamel and sweaty canvas. The hill breathes again, ragged and humbled. The platoon lies back in the black grit and waits for the next exhale. The dispatch board at 5th Tank Battalion looks like a firehouse roster. Grease pencil lines connect company fronts to flame teams pooled for need, not pride. Turkey Knob, the amphitheatre, a nameless terrace where a platoon has gone quiet. Runners come and go with overlays and canteen cups of coffee that taste like rust. The phrase repeats up and down the net until it is less an order than a habit of mind. Hold for flame. Infantry fix, flame finishes, dozer breaches, rifles clear, charges seal. It reads like a recipe and it works because men follow it the same way every time. On the terraces, process outlives fear. A rear phone bolted to the tank's tailplate becomes a confessional where lieutenants tell tank commanders exactly how scared they are and exactly what they need. The standard operating procedure is only partly ink. Mostly it is men doing the same thing the same way so strangers can work like friends. Scouts mark vents with chalk and tracer ladders. Machine guns post arcs to cut down anyone who rushes the nozzle. Portable flamethrower teams still go forward, but now they follow the tank's wake and clear what the projector has cooked. The enemy tries courage. Nakata's battalion, like others on the island, organises suicide rushes to blind the snout and swarm the projector with grenades. Some make it close enough to hear the CO2 hiss that sounds like a soda fountain hidden in hell. Most do not, because coaxial guns and infantry flanks write long, hard lines across the ground where a man must cross open air. The mind adjusts to a new terror. Shelling was numbers. Flame is personal. It hunts your breath. By evening, maintenance crews turn terraces into pits of small light. Headlamps halo mechanics who lay scorched hoses on canvas like rosary beads. They swap gaskets, cut lines to length, tap threads, and test the projector by pointing it into the sea so the night does not learn too much. Fuel drums shuffle on sleds. CO2 cylinders roll in a chain of hands. Dozer blades are measured in lanes and minutes now. A 10-yard bite can buy a platoon an hour of life. Rourke's men eat in their holes and listen to the island scuff their boots like a cat that does not like them. Delgado's driver writes a note home he will never send. There is nowhere for a letter to leave from yet. Nakata dozes with his back to a wall that radiates warmth like a stove. At midnight, a call crawls down the wire from division to platoon. Dawn, same place, another vent. A human chain rolls drums down a pier with the patience of monks moving bells. Palms blister, shoulders throb, nobody complains. The drums are napalm-thickened fuel, a thing that behaves like syrup until it behaves like weather. They go from ship to beach to dump to tank park to line, a tempo built from forklifts, mules, curses, and a surprising amount of laughter. Abundance is not a spectacle here. It is a process that repeats until rock surrenders. The pace quickens and the math begins to sing. The same handful of flamethrower Shermans, only 8 had landed on D-Day, now answer calls across division boundaries as if they were engines from a single firehouse. An officer quietly admits he is delaying an entire battalion's movement until a flame tank can be spared. The pause is not cowardice, it is professionalism. The method saves men. A projector dinged by a shaped charge is stripped by lantern light and made whole before first stand to. A hose that cracks in the heat is measured, cut, clamped and tested while the crew eats from ration cans. CO 2 cylinders are counted like coins. Gauges are logged in grease pencil on the turret roof. On the other side of the stone, the ledger runs backward. Nakata's sergeant rations water to mouthfuls and time to moments. Ammunition goes out and does not return as captured boxes. Men carry wet cloths to fight a physics problem with faith. The vents that once made life possible now betray positions to men who have learned to read the island's breath. They block what they can and unmask what they must. The air keeps moving. It is the island's nature. It is also now the Americans' ally. Here is the number that feels like rumour until it is written in grease pencil on a battalion board. 10,000 gallons. That is the daily burn rate the 5th Tank Battalion will touch at the peak. A single unit pouring more fuel into stone in one day than some enemies could spare for a month of movement. It seems impossible until you stand near a drumline and watch time become liquid. Delgado leans against his tank and feels heat bleeding from the projector into his shoulder blades through the armour. Rourke squints at the sky and decides the wind will help by dawn. Lillian, half a world away, signs another manifest and rubs a pencil smudge off her wrist with a rag that never gets clean. The system shows itself not in speeches, but in schedules. The island planned for fury. Fury burns hot. Schedules burned forever, well before first light. The bowl looks carved by a god who loved geometry and hated flesh. Marines call it the amphitheatre, a scooped arena of black terraces, where every approach seems already measured by enemy guns. The morning air tastes like pennies. Rourke's platoon studies an overlay that would have been drawn by candle stub the night before. 4 vents marked with tiny crescents, 1 suspected rear exit chalked in dotted line where a lava fold slumps. "We'll do it like we practiced," he tells men who have practiced for only a week and aged a year. Scouts would have rehearsed tracer ladders in the dark. The radio man checks his watch against battalion time. The dozer crew smokes in silence and looks like men waiting their turn at a gallows. Delgado's Sherman hums like a generator. The driver sets the hull just offline from the first vent so the nozzle can sweep without exposing the flank. The gunner leans into his improvised sight picture, knuckles white where a periscope used to be. The loader checks clamps on a spare nozzle and whispers the sequence he will follow if the projector hiccups. The dozer variant waits behind them, blade scarred and proud, engine ticking like an anxious animal. This is not bravado. It is choreography, a doctrine born last week and moving like it has always existed. The first burn takes on the second breath. Smoke tumbles out and is replaced by a jet that creeps like a hand over the rock. The blast wall inside does what engineers intended until it does the opposite, bending fire deeper. Nakata's section would have wet cloths ready, sand buckets in reach, drills memorized with monkish discipline. The cloths steam dry in a heartbeat. Vents 2 and 3 become easy once one is mapped. Airflow betrays the hidden rooms like a draft under a door. The dozer comes up in a growl and bites a mouth where flame has softened stone. backing and biting again until the lane would take a man upright. Back at battalion, an S4 officer scratches figures that feel disconnected from the ash stuck to his boots. Gallons issued, cylinders rotated, hoses replaced. He does not write lives saved, but the ledger hums with it. The method is expensive in fuel, cheap in marines. The trade is as cold as algebra and as merciful as rain. When the fourth vent exhales soot and quiet, Rourke raises a hand and men sink into the grit, listening for the last cough of a dying position. The dozer backs away with a squeal that sounds like metal remembering its shape. A runner from the next company arrives before the echo dies. "We need your Zippo at Turkey Knob." Delgado thumbs the turret phone and nods. The staircase of verbs leads on, one tread at a time, into the next pocket of stone that thinks it cannot burn. No one hears the number at first. They feel it. They feel it in the rhythm of drums passed hand to hand, in the itch of fuel on wrists, in the way the projector's enamel blisters at noon and flakes by dusk. But on this day, the board at 5th Tank Battalion says it out loud in grease pencil that smears under a thumb, 10,000. Underneath, as if to translate, someone writes gallons. A corporal underlines it twice and laughs like a man who has seen a magician show the hidden mirror. The laugh isn't joy, it's recognition. The island is being fed fire at a rate that would have sounded like brag yesterday. Rourke times an assault to the dispatch schedule the way a station master would time a train. The company waits for the pooled flame tank as if it were weather they can choose. When Delgado arrives, engine smell, tar smell, a hint of hot paint, the platoon moves as though the tank carries an order from physics. He knows the wind is lazy today. The jet will travel true, and he will waste nothing, because waste is a misunderstanding of abundance. Abundance here is precision, a system that can do the same thing the same way until stone forgets how to be stubborn. Nakata reads Kuribayashi's message passed down through the galleries. American firepower is beyond description. He copies the phrase onto a scrap and folds it into his pocket, not as defeat, but as a line he intends to argue with his hands. Yet there is a new burden down here. Every hour has to explain itself in water, in ammunition, in breath. They seal vents only to open them to keep men from fainting. They move caches, only to find that airflow does not respect bravery. He watches flame arrive predictably, a schedule as cruel as mathematics. In the tank park that night, maintenance looks like ritual. Cylinders roll in a chain, each valve checked by feel. Hoses are cut against a tape that is shiny with use. A cracked clamp becomes a lesson, passed to the other crews while coffee boils on a manifold. The projector that took a rock shard is stripped by lantern light and test-fired into the surf. The plume hisses and hammers the water flat. Someone calls the hour and writes it on the turret in chalk so the next crew knows exactly how long that nozzle has left. 10,000 gallons in a day on a speck of sulphur in the Pacific would seem impossible anywhere but here. It is not spectacle, it is a calendar. It is the reason a lieutenant will look at a map tomorrow and draw a line he would never have dared without fire. It is the reason a hill's brag becomes a cough. It is the sound of a nation's factories speaking through a nozzle that glows dull red, then dark. Wind is a fifth crewman. Delgado treats it with respect bordering on superstition. He licks a finger, lifts it, and feels a softness from the sea that will gift him yards. Range on paper reads 60 to 80, but paper doesn't feel the island breathe. With the right push, the jet will reach farther. With the wrong swirl, it will collapse and tumble back in hot mist that eats paint and pride. He coaches his gunner in a language of wrists. A hair left, breathe now, hold it, ease. The driver watches the CO2 needle slide. Pressure means reach, and reach means fewer seconds spent in the open. The loader mouths the emergency drill that would save them if the nozzle coughs flame where it should not. Rourke's scouts learn to build ladders from tracer, stepping light pulses up stone toward a vent so the gunner can rake the line as if following a chalk mark only he can see. Smoke grenades show the truth of air. They curl back or they race forward, and either way they confess. Infantry keeps a standoff that would typically be a tank length or two, far enough to respect backflash, close enough to sprint when the dozer opens the mouth. Radios crackle with brevity codes that reduce fear to syllables. Inside the caves, Nakata listens for the coughs that mean a nozzle is fouling, 2 short, 1 long, and hears instead a clean hiss that says another projector has arrived to finish what the last began. He experiments because engineers do not stop. He stacks damp blankets by the bend and orders men to flood the floor near the vent with canteens, a gesture of hope more than physics. The heat takes hope apart gently, and then all at once. The technicals move like weather maps over paper. CO2 pressure decays on a curve crews could sketch in their sleep. The gauge warns them when reach will shorten and tells them when to stop pretending it hasn't. Traverse limits demand that the driver cheat the hull, nudging track by inches to buy the gunner angles the turret cannot give. Ground pressure makes the sand behave like water. If a driver spins a lug in panic, the tank will sit down and think about its mistakes. Here is the statistic that sounds like heresy until you remember what year this is. Stateside refineries in 1945 push out petroleum by the hundreds of thousands of barrels a day. An hourly flow that would have eclipsed the entire island garrison's useful reserves many times over. In the minutes it takes to clear a single vent, American industry replaces the fuel burned and then throws a shadow of surplus over tomorrow. Delgado finishes a long, perfect sweep and thumps the hatch with his glove, a thank you to luck and to men he will never meet who machined clamps and valves on midnight shifts. The projector ticks as it cools, counting its own heartbeat. The hill's mouth steams, then drools black. Rourke signals the dozer with a flat hand. The blade answers like a promise kept. Maps make it look simple, arrows and numbered vents inside a crooked U, but the gorge is a knot tied by a patient hand. The grease pencil plan on the hood of a Jeep lists times like a train table: 0610 smoke, 0615 Zippo 1, 0622 dozer breach, 0630 demo, 0645 seal. Rourke runs his finger along the schedule and looks up to where reality waits. He has learned to trust clocks in a place that despises them. The chaplain folds letters at the rear, each envelope addressed by a buddy's careful print. It is the most honest work on the island. Delgado's crew runs the ritual with a tired grace that would have been called elegance anywhere else. The driver hovers the hull just off axis so the nozzle can sweep without scraping rock. The gunner rides the jet like a welder drawing a bead. The loader counts seconds allowed to guard against greed. Long burns can feel righteous and wasteful at once. The first vent coughs black and then opens like a kiln door. A second breathes sideways, surprising even the draft-savvy crew. The gunner paints a crescent, quick and thin, to herd air where he wants it. Inside, Nakata posts his last men at a turn that once felt immune to maps. He has a demolition charge he meant for a tank track, and now saves for his own exit if the choice is certain. He has stopped promising water and started promising quiet. The air is thin. The floor is damp. The men look like miners from a country that will never be mapped again. He hears flames speak a calm language. It pronounces the shapes of their rooms with perfect diction. The dozer arrives like a wall that moves. It bites, backs, bites again, each cut a gift to riflemen who would otherwise crawl into holes head first. Demolition men shuffle past, cradling blocks and fuses against their chests as if protecting small animals. A runner slips, rolls, stands, and keeps running. He is carrying a time more than a message. The schedule trembles, but does not fail. The blade opens a mouth and the projector makes it shout. A rear exit is found by the simple test of air against lips. By noon, the pocket is a diagram of steam and silence. The chaplain reads names to men who pretend they are not listening. Rourke marks a map and thinks of the first time he said, "Hold for flame." Delgado leans his forehead on metal that scalds and lets the heat remind him he is still here. Nakata tears his last page from his notebook and presses it into a crack in the wall with 2 fingers. It says nothing brave, only the truth he has left. The final charge shakes the floor like a train leaving a station. Dust hangs and then settles into a new geometry. The gorge becomes a past tense. The first superfortress limps in with a feathered prop and a wing that looks chewed. It floats over the black strip where Motoyama airfields have been scraped into submission, wheels kiss cinder, and the big bomber shudders to a stop while Marines in dusty dungarees cheer like men at a county fair who just watched a miracle land. A crew chief in a leather jacket climbs down and kisses the ground as if the island were home instead of sulphur. He asks who to thank. Rourke points at a dozer blade streaked with lava dust and then at a tank with a capped snout. The numbers take a breath and begin to speak. Over the coming months, more than 2,200 B-29s will make emergency landings here, crews that would have vanished into ocean weather or enemy night now taxiing to a halt on stone that once spit fire. Each save is a dozen or more airmen who write letters instead of becoming names on a list. The airfields are not an abstract. They are a choice that began in a cave mouth when somebody said, "Hold for flame." Delgado watches bombers limp in with flaps drooping like tired birds and counts the quiet victories his nozzle wrote without ever seeing them. He will tell his grandchildren, if life gives him grandchildren, that he once watched a machine big as a houseland on a runway his friends made by blowing caves into past tense. He can name the parts on his projector in his sleep. He cannot name the faces of the crews who wave from canopies. That is the way of systems. You save strangers. Lillian reads a stateside paper at her kitchen table and sees a paragraph buried under ration recipes. B-29 crews saved by Iwo Jima landings. She runs a finger under the line and thinks of turret rings, clamps, hoses, and the click of a stamp against an inspection card. The paper does not say that Detroit and Honolulu and 100 other places wrote those landings into being. It does not need to. She knows. On the far side, Nakata's notebook page would have yellowed in a crack if anyone had found it. The war moves past men like him and uses their rooms as storage for the next thing. The tunnels they trusted become drag lines for runway fill. The vents that breathed soldiers now breathe engines. When the day's count reaches a neat round figure, somebody chalks it on a board and an ordnance man draws a little pair of wings. The runway shimmers with heat. A Marine wipes his face with a rag that smells like gasoline and laughs at nothing. The island is a harbour now, and the tide is airplanes. The motor pool is quiet like a church after a wedding. Delgado's Zippo sits with its enamel crazed into a spiderweb, projector capped, tool roll tight under a strap. There is salt in every crevice, ash in every hinge. Rourke walks the line of tanks and dozers and feels the odd peace that falls when a place stops trying to kill you every minute. He inventories the day in a private ledger, names spoken, lanes opened, charges placed, and finds the math unbalanced in a way war never learns to fix. The chaplain pockets a final sheaf of letters. The ocean breathes beyond the line like a giant animal asleep. Now the numbers take their seat and tell the story straight. The battle ran from 19th February to 26th March, 1945. America lost 6,821 killed and more than 19,000 wounded. Japan lost roughly 21,000 killed and surrendered scarcely more than 200 prisoners. 8 M4A3 Shermans converted to POACWSH. 1 flamethrowers landed with the assault. Pooled and dispatched, they became the tool infantry waited for before moving. On peak days, the 5th Tank Battalion burned about 10,000 gallons of napalm-thickened fuel into tunnels that once bragged of immortality. The impossible statistic sits quietly in the corner like a fact that does not brag because it does not need to. The United States built roughly 49,000 M4 Shermans, more tanks than the Empire of Japan produced of all types in the entire war. That is not a taunt, it is a description of industrial democracy at speed. It explains how a damaged projector is a delay and not a disaster, how a drained cylinder is an errand and not a crisis, how a lieutenant on a terrace can speak into a steel phone and expect an answer from a stranger who has everything he needs to make stone obey. Nakata's rooms turn to storage for runway fill and then to silence. His notebook would have told a reader that the men below were not fools or cowards. They were competent defenders who met a system built to return every day until the map changed. Lillian clocks out under a sky that looks like Michigan and hears the plant floor shift from tanks to tractors in a sound like a country exhaling. Rourke sits on a crate and writes letters for men who cannot, describing small, clean things. The wind on the day the jet reached farther than it should have. The quiet after a charge sealed a mouth forever. Delgado lays his gloved hand on the projector one last time and thanks it the way sailors touch a good hull. He knows freedom is heavier than steel and lighter than breath, and that machines only matter because they keep men alive long enough to go home. The island still smells of sulphur when the first transport lifts off for the long ride east. The runway hums like a promise a nation kept because it had the will and the factories to keep it. The record endures in steel numbers and human names, a ledger of courage balanced by the abundance that made victory certain but never cheap.